everybody, welcome to another lesson of learning Japanese. What are we covering today? Today we're going to cover one of the most commonly used grammar patterns in the entire Japanese language, and it is also going to be one of the trickiest. And this grammar pattern is going to be the very simple grammar pattern of clause 1 plus the particle to plus clause 2. So clause 1 to clause 2. And the reason why this grammar pattern is going to prove to be so tricky is because it's going to carry a different meaning, a different function, depending on the context of the sentence you use it in. And we're talking about a lot of different meanings here, up to five different functions that you need to memorize and associate with certain tenses and forms just to know which one is being used. So we should know at this point that the Japanese particle to is commonly translated to just simply mean and, as in kind of a connector between clauses so that you can continue the sentence onwards. Well, the word and is a pretty general translation, and if you were to analyze a couple of English sentences too using the word and, you could see that maybe those sentences would be more specific if you replace and with a different word, such as when or if or whenever. And so this grammar pattern is going to be very similar to that, even though we're going to loosely translate it as clause 1 and clause 2. If we take a deeper look at the sentences and what they're trying to say, we would maybe more appropriately use words such as when, if, whenever, depending again on the context of the sentence. So to start off, we're going to break this grammar pattern into two different categories, and in this lesson we're going to cover the first main category of the two. And the two main distinctions that we're going to have here is when we use this grammar pattern in the non-past tense and when we use it in the past tense. So a pretty general rule of the Japanese language that we should know by now from experience, all of the grammar patterns we have experienced thus far, is that when we have a sentence in the Japanese language with two clauses, it's always going to be the second clause that determines the overall form of the sentence. So in the case of this grammar pattern, if we have two clauses, which we always will because that's just what this grammar pattern is, it's the second clause that is going to determine the tense of the whole sentence. And so if we have the second clause in its past tense, then the whole sentence, both clause 1 and clause 2, are going to refer to past occurrences. On the other hand, if the second clause or clause 2 is in the non-past tense, then the whole sentence, both clause 1 and clause 2, are going to refer to non-past occurrences. So we see here that there are options for clause 2. It can be in the past tense or it can be the non-past tense. For clause 1, we also have two options as to what form to use, but the key thing to note here is that in this grammar pattern, in all instances of this grammar pattern, clause 1 either has to be in its dictionary form or its negative knife form. This in turn means that clause 1 can never be in the past tense form, and that's not a problem because, like I just said, it's the second clause that determines the whole tense of the sentence. So if you want to make clause 1 refer to an event that happened in the past, then all you have to do is make the second clause, clause 2, refer to something that happened to the past, and then so will clause 1. So like I said earlier, we're going to cover only one of the two main categories of this grammar pattern, and that is going to be when the second clause is in the past tense, which means that clause 1 is also referring to something in the past, even if it's only conjugated into its dictionary form, which is generally meant to refer to something in the future. So that's the information that we have cemented right now. If clause 2 is in its past tense, then clause 1 is also in its past tense, which means the whole sentence is in the past tense. And now that we have that set in stone, we now have to break this main category into three lesser tiers. Because when you use this grammar pattern in the past tense, there are then three additional cases in which this grammar pattern can mean. So the first meaning that this grammar pattern can take on when it's used in the past tense is that clause 1 and clause 2 represent two events that happen consecutively but coincidentally, as in clause 1, then clause 2. And it's important to note here that the event that happened in clause 2 cannot be controllable by the speaker of the sentence. So let's go through two example sentences for this particular case. So for our first example sentence, we have the line, "Watashi no e o miseru to George Washington wa waratta." And what this line is going to translate to is just basically, I showed my picture and George Washington laughed. So let's break down the sentence bit by bit. First up, we have watashi no e. And the word e here is just going to mean drawing or picture basically. We have the noun of a noun modification. So watashi means I or me, so watashi no e means basically my drawing. We're going to mark my drawing with the direct object particle o to make it the direct object of the verb that's about to show up, which is going to be the verb miseru, which is going to be the verb to show. So basically, the first clause we have here, watashi no e o miseru, translates to I show my picture. But we're going to see real soon that the second clause of this sentence is in the past tense, which is going going to in turn make the first clause in the past tense too, even though it's in the dictionary form. So right now we can preemptively instead revise that translation to I showed my drawing. And so that's the first clause. And then of course, as the grammar pattern demands, we have the particle to right after it to connect it to the second clause. And now we move on to the second clause, which is just the simple clause, George Washington wa waratta. So of course we have George Washington here being the topic. We have the wa marking him as such. Then we have the verb waratta, which is going to be the verb warao in its past plain tense. And so if warao means to laugh, then basically here we have the past tense form of that, which is laughed. And so if we connect that with the first part of the sentence, then all we really have here is just the line, I showed my drawing to him and George Washington laughed. So here you can get a good idea of what I was trying to say earlier about how we can make a sentence that consists of two clauses and connect it with the very general word and that can have many different meanings. But if you analyze the sentence a little bit more, maybe you could replace the and with a word that's more specific to what relationship you're trying to express between the two clauses. So here we have I showed my drawing to him and George Washington laughed, but maybe for this particular version of this grammar pattern, we want to emphasize the consecutive relationship between the two clauses, so maybe we'll replace the and with a then, and then we have I showed my drawing to him, then George Washington laughed. Additionally, maybe we could replace the and with a when instead, so it becomes when I showed my drawing to him, George Washington laughed. And you can see here that these three different sentences pretty much carry the same general meaning, but depending on what you're trying to express exactly, you might use one instead of the other number of options you have. So let's move on to our next example sentence. For our next line, we have the sentence 小説を読むと坂の意見を理解できました. And what this line is going to translate to is something along the lines of, when I read the novel, I could understand the author's opinions. Or again, if you wanted to use the conjunction and instead, I read the novel and could understand the author's opinions. Let's break down the sentence bit by bit. First up, we have 小説, which is going to be the noun for novel basically. We have the particle o marking it as the direct object of the verb yomu, which is of course to read. So there we have it. That's our first clause, a really simple one, yomu, just in its dictionary form. We don't know if it's in the past tense or whatever tense right now because we still have to look at the second clause to see what it does to the whole sentence. So now let's move on. We have the particle to, of course, because that's just what the grammar pattern needs. Then we have saka no iken, and saka is just basically the word for author. We have the noun of a noun modification here, modifying iken with saka, so iken means opinion, so basically saka no iken is going to be the author's opinion or opinions. We have another o here to mark those opinions as direct object of the verb that's about to come, which is the verb rikai suru, which is basically just a verbal noun that means to understand. Here we're going to conjugate suru into its past tense, polite past tense this time around, so it becomes shimashita, so rikai shimashita is I understood. So let's bring all the components of the sentence together, and we have I read the novel and could understand the author's opinions. So one thing we haven't quite stressed enough here is that we need to notice how in the second clause, the thing that happened was uncontrollable to the speaker of the sentence. Earlier we had the second clause of George Washington laughed, and we can see here that you can't control what someone else thinks is funny or when he or she laughs at something that he or she may think is funny or not. So that was an uncontrollable action to the speaker. And now in this example sentence, our second clause is I understood the author's opinions, and that is also something that is not too controllable by yourself. If you understand something, that's just kind of an inherent occurrence. And so again, this version of the past tense, bigger version of this grammar pattern is going to mean that clause 1, then clause 2 basically, and it has an emphasis on that consecutive occurrence by coincidence. And also something that I may have not noted before is that with these lesser tiers of the grammar pattern, there's no way for us to know which one is being used other than by context. There's no grammar that we can pinpoint on to know which one it means. You're just going to have to know from the context of the sentence. So now let's move on to the second version of the past tense version of this grammar pattern. And what this version is going to entail is that clause 1 is kind of setting up a setting basically, or a background for clause 2 to happen. And so what you might translate to is something along the lines of when clause 1, clause 2, and that's probably a bit confusing because in some cases for the previous version that we just did, you could have used the word when too. So maybe in this version it's more appropriate to say while clause 1 was going on, clause 2 happened. And given this emphasis on the while, that expresses clause 1 as an ongoing occurrence when clause 2 happened, thereby being a setting or a background for clause 2. What is commonly used grammatically for clause 1 in this version is the te iru form. And we have covered this grammar pattern in a previous video before. It basically just expresses an ongoing occurrence or action. And of course, even though the verb itself is conjugating to the te form, which isn't allowed in this grammar pattern, it is succeeded by the verb iru, which is in fact in its dictionary form, so it is overall allowed in this grammar pattern. So now let's go through 2 examples for this version of this grammar pattern. So for our first example sentence, we have the line Heiya o soji shite iru to okane o mitsuketa. So now let's translate this sentence. If we wanted to do the general translation with the word and, we could just say, I was cleaning my room and I found some money. If we wanted to emphasize the actual function of this version in which clause 1 is ongoing when clause 2 happened, then we could say instead, while I was cleaning my room, I found some money. So let's break down this sentence bit by bit. It's actually one that we've pretty much used a lot in previous lessons, just in a different grammar pattern. But of course, let's break it down anyways. First up, we have heiya, which is going to be the word for room. We have o, marking it as the direct object. We have soji suru, which is going to be the verbal noun to clean. We're going to change the suru into its te form, so it becomes shite. Then we add iru to mean is cleaning or was cleaning, once we know that this whole sentence is in the past tense because the second clause is in the past tense. So shite iru was cleaning. Then we add the particle to because that's just what this grammar pattern's construction is. Then we move on to the second clause, okane, which is going to be money. We have o, marking money as the direct object, and then we have the verb mitsukeru, which means to find, and this is in the plain past form, so this whole sentence is in the plain past form, and then we bring it all together. And so for our sentence, we have I was cleaning my room and I found some money, or while I was cleaning my room, I found some money. Heiya o soji shiteiru to okane o mitsuketa. Let's move on to another example sentence with this version of the grammar pattern. For our next line, we have Rabo de computer o tsukatte iru to teiden ga atta. And so we can translate this sentence to something along the lines of I was using a computer in the lab and there was a blackout, or while I was using a computer in the lab, there was a blackout. Let's break down the sentence bit by bit. First up, we have rabo, and this is going to basically just mean lab, as in computer lab. We have de, marking it as a location in which an action occurred, and that action is going to be computer o tsukatte iru, and computer is going to be computer. We have o, marking as a direct object of the verb tsukao, which means to use. Tsukao is going to be turned into its te form, plus adding the verb iru after it to mean was using. So tsukatte iru means was using. It would usually mean is using, but here we know that the second clause is going to be in its past tense, which makes the whole sentence in the past. So was using a computer in the lab. Then we have to make it into this grammar pattern. Then we move on to the second clause, which is teiden ga atta, and teiden is going to basically mean a blackout or electricity going out, basically. Then we follow that with ga aru to mean there was a blackout. So ga aru, but aru is going to turn into its past plain form, so it turns into atta. And so all together, the whole sentence is, again, rabo de computer o tsukatte iru to teiden ga atta is I was using a computer in the lab and there was a blackout, or while I was using a computer in the lab, there was a blackout. And so yeah, those two examples cover this version of the grammar pattern in which there's an ongoing action here that's setting up the background for something else to happen. And so we notice how in clause 1 we had things that express an ongoing action. I was using a computer, I was continuously using a computer, or I was in the process of cleaning my room, then something happened. And again, this something that happens in clause 2 is going to be something that's uncontrollable by the speaker. I found some money. I don't think you can control that. If you did, you'd be rich. Then there's also, there was a blackout. I also don't think you can control that, but yeah. And so now we move on to the third and the last version of the past tense version of this grammar pattern. And so for this version, what is going to happen is basically clause 1 is going to be initially the main action, but in performing clause 1, the speaker is then in turn going to discover clause 2, which then kind of just becomes the center of attention for the sentence. And so what this will translate to is something along the lines of, when clause 1 happened, the speaker discovered clause 2. And what's really important here is that the second clause, clause 2, is going to have to represent an event that was already in process before the speaker discovered it by performing clause 1, or it's going to have to be a state of affairs. So basically clause 2 can't represent something that occurred right when the speaker did clause 1 because the speaker did clause 1. It has to be something that was already going on, then the speaker discovered it because he or she did clause 1. And so this is going to distinguish this version from the first version that we did by a lot, because in the first version what we had was that clause 2 was basically a consecutive consequence of clause 1, but in this version there's no consequence. It's just the speaker discovering that clause 2 was already going on when he or she did clause 1. So to ease some confusion now, let's just jump into 2 examples to get a better idea of this. So for our first example sentence, we have the line コンビニにコーラを買いに行くとジョージ・ワシントンがいた. And so what this line will translate to is basically, I went to the convenience store to buy some cola and George Washington was there. So let's break down this sentence bit by bit. First up, we have konbini, which is just going to be convenience store. We have ni marking it as the destination. We have koda, which is going to be soda basically. We have o marking soda as the direct object of the verb kao, which means to buy. We're going to use the grammar pattern that consists of the pre-mas form of a verb plus the particle ni plus a going verb such as iku to mean to go somewhere to do that verb. So here we have kao in its pre-mas form, which is kai. We have the particle ni right after it. Then we have the verb iku. So what this first clause is going to translate to is I go to the convenience store to buy cola. We're going to find out that the second clause is in its past tense, which in turn makes the whole sentence into the past tense. So this will then turn into I went to the convenience store to buy cola. But let's just move on for now. We have the particle to make use of this grammar pattern. And then we have the simple words George Washington ga ita. And this is just going to be George Washington was there. Ga and imas are just going to represent the existence of a person. And we covered that in a previous video. So check out the existential verbs video to get a better idea of that. And so now we combine everything together and it's just going to be I went to the convenience store to buy some cola and George Washington was there, or I noticed George Washington was there. Konbini ni kora o kai ni iku to George Washington ga ita. And we notice here that George Washington being at the convenience store was something that was already in the process before we went to the convenience store. It wasn't a result of us going to the convenience store, it's just something that we came upon once we actually went to the convenience store. We discovered that it was the case. And also notice that George Washington being at the convenience store is, for all intents and purposes, something that is out of the speaker's control, our control if we're saying the sentence. So yeah. So now let's move on to another example with this version of the grammar pattern. And for our next line we have Doa o kakeru to ame ga futeimashita. And what this will simply translate to is just I opened the door and noticed that it was raining. Breaking down the sentence bit by bit, first up we have doa, and this is just going to be door. We have o marking it as the direct object of the sentence. We have the verb kakeru in its dictionary form is going to mean open, so basically I opened the door. We have the particle to make use of this grammar pattern, and then simply after that is the clause ame ga futeimashita, and this is going to be it was raining. Ame is rain. We have ga marking as the subject. We have the verb furu. It's going to be in its te form plus iru in its past form to express an ongoing action in the past. So if furu means to fall, then it's going to be was falling, but we just naturally translate the whole clause to it was raining. And so again, altogether the sentence is I opened the door and it was raining, or I opened the door and I noticed it was raining. Doa o kakeru to ame ga futeimashita. And again, notice here that the rain falling was something that was definitely going on before you even opened the door, and when you opened the door, it was just the simple case of you noticing that it was raining. And of course, rain falling is also beyond the speaker's control here, so everything looks a-okay. And so there we have it. Those are the 3 versions of the past tense version of this grammar pattern. They are all pretty distinct, so it's good to know the differences between them, even though there's no grammatical indication as to which one is being used. This is one of those things where you have to know from context, and it does do good to experience these sentences being said a lot and even practicing them yourself. And so that covers the past tense version of this grammar pattern. In our next lesson, we're going to continue off of this grammar pattern and cover the cases of the non-past version of this grammar pattern.